Yo, what's going on, people? It's your boy Huncho, and this is Cases Season 1, Episode 10, Zac Olumegbon Case, aka Lil Zac from TN1. Zac Olumegbon, age 15, more known by his alias Lil Zac, wasn't a rapper like we've previously spoken about throughout this Cases series, but was affiliated with a Tulse Hill gang known as TN1, or as some people now recognise them, as UK drill rap group 86. Zac was the youngest of his 8 brothers and sisters and was said to have been extremely close to his dad because apart from his older brother, the house was full of females and he looked up to his dad for guidance in his life. When he was born, the doctors would go on to say that he had sickle cell disease, and it was said that as he was growing, he was very small and was several years behind in growth. Because he was smaller, his family would go on to say that he felt like he had to be louder to prove a point and that he was more outgoing than a lot of his family members. And his older brother would even go on to say that Zac was a more confident talker in comparison to himself. When Zac was 10 years old, his father had sadly passed away, and at this current time, I'm unsure as to the reasons why. But after this, his older brother Debo had felt like he had to become the man of the house and take care of his family, which included making sure that his mother was okay. In doing this though, in his own words, he would go on to tell the BBC documentary surrounding Zac's death that he had felt like Zac had wanted him to be there for him, but he wasn't, and he felt like he had neglected talking and guiding Zac throughout his early teenage years. As there was no role models in the house, it was thought that Zac had took to the local youths in the area. To many growing up in inner cities, what police would label gangs, the group would see as family, and Zac felt like because he knew the group and had grew up in the area, he then would take a liking to the gang, and it would be at this point, whether intentionally or not, he would become a TN1 gang member. Around the same time, he started having behavioural problems at his mainstream school, and was then referred to a behavioural school, that being Park Campus in West Norwood. When he arrived there, his teachers would notice that Zac could sometimes be the most respectful child he would ever come across, but they would also go on to say that he could be the most rude. But they understood that his behaviour problems was a reflection on the fact that he was trying to come to terms of his dad's passing in the years prior. So TN1's rivals were Brixton's Gas Gang, which many of you would have heard of before. Because of where Gas Gang was located, Zac's sisters and his mum would go on to say that Zac would be scared to go into the area where they were due to his involvement with TN1 and feared the repercussions of going into Gas Gang territory. As the years would go on, Zac would want to break away from involvement with TN1, and his school was working with them to do this, and Zac's aim was to go back to mainstream school and continue his life away from the gang. On July the 1st, 2010, one day before his murder, he was involved in a conference that was held by London's Serious Youth Violence Board, where he spoke to an audience of 120 professionals, and this is a snippet of what he said at that conference.
Prison's not a nice place. I really don't want to go there, but stuff that was happening, I was looking to keep going that way. But now, we lot so hopefully I won't be going that way.
Just to give people an idea here, what do you feel the risks are, just on a daily basis of serious violence in the world that you live in?
Daily basis, get stabbed, shot, die, school day, anytime.
So, the case of Lil Zac starts about 2 weeks prior to his death. I can't currently find any in-depth details about the situation, but it was briefly reported that in mid-June of 2010, a Gas Gang member had been stabbed by a TN1 gang rival when Zac was either present, and if not at the stabbing, then he was present shortly beforehand. So, because of this, Gas Gang were hungry for revenge, and for Zac, this had marked him as a target for them. So, Zac's school being a behavioural school, it was believed that mobile phones were to be confiscated as pupils entered the building. So, on July the 2nd, 2010, at around 8:30 AM, Zac had refused to hand his mobile phone in when he had reached school, and he asked to see a senior teacher and was waiting in reception when Zac had noticed a car drive past. Initial reports said that Zac was heard telling a friend, that's them, and then walked out of the door. The group who were travelling in the car, that being Gas Gang members, had first approached another 14-year-old pupil and stabbed him in the arm, but he had ran back into the school to seek safety. The group had then turned on Zac, and he was chased roughly 440 feet to nearby Gypsy Road Gardens and was subsequently stabbed multiple times. When school staff arrived, he was found in the rear garden of 20 Gypsy Road Gardens. Here, he had fell fell into the arms of his teacher. Police, the London's ambulance service, and air ambulance attended the scene at around 8:50 AM, where they had found Zac suffering from multiple stab wounds. He was taken to a South London hospital and was pronounced dead a short while later at around 10:05 AM. The 14-year-old boy was also taken to a South London hospital, suffering from minor injuries, and he went on to make a full recovery. It was also reported that on this day, all students who attended the school were kept inside for questioning by teachers and police. And a day later, on the 3rd of July 2010, 5 people had been arrested in connection with the murder, with Detective Chief Inspector McFarlane from the Met Police Homicide and Serious Crime Command saying at the time, "I am now satisfied this was a planned attack," with 4 black males arriving in the area in a car. Our inquiries have so far led me to believe that a confrontation took place outside the school involving the 2 victims and the suspects. The 15-year-old victim was chased into Gypsy Road Gardens, where sadly he had suffered fatal injuries, and the 14-year-old boy had ran back into the school to seek safety, but was attacked in the grounds of the school, and he had suffered minor injuries. Following the attack, the 4 males left in the car and headed in the direction of Gypsy Hill. Police confirmed one line of inquiry they were following is that the murder was motivated by gang rivalries, and they said that they believed the attack had been planned in advance because this followed a series of clashes between 2 rival teenage gangs known as TN1 and Gas Gang. On this day, local shopkeeper Saima Sadfar would describe to reporters how Zac had fell into the arms of his teacher, and she went on to say, "She had her hands open, but it was too late and he collapsed in her arms. I was told there were 3 or 4 people with a big knife. Apparently, one of the teachers realised something was going on and ran out to help. She said that she had knew Zac and that he was no trouble." On this day, a post-mortem examination would take place at Greenwich Mortuary and would give the cause of death as stab wounds to the chest. And it was heard later on that day that 3 of the 5 arrested in connection with the incident were bailed while 2 had remained in police custody. And it emerged that on this day, a number of fights and attacks had happened in the school as youths from different gangs from across London had attended, and they were all together under one roof. And it was reported that a police community support officer was attacked and chased by a group of youths outside the school the evening before the fatal stabbing. On the 7th of July 2010, the 2 teenagers aged 16 who were kept in police custody were then charged with Zac's murder. Appearing at Sutton Youth Court on the same day, they were also charged with the grievous bodily harm of the 14-year-old boy who was stabbed in the arm. There's no reports of that hearing, but more than likely at the hearing they would have had the charges read against them, they would have confirmed their names, and no bail application would have been made on their behalfs. And they would have had a further court date set. 2 days later, on the 9th of July 2010, a further 16-year-old boy had been charged with Zac's murder and causing grievous bodily harm to the 14-year-old pupil, and he was due to appear at Sutton Magistrates Court on the 13th of July 2010. At this hearing, the youth had made a brief appearance in front of Judge Richard Hawkins QC via video link from a Young Offenders Institute. Wearing a green round neck jumper, he spoke only to confirm his name, and no bail application was made on his behalf. A further court date was then given to the teenager for the 3rd of August 2010, and that was at Sutton Youth Court, and on this day, the other 2 boys that had been charged with Zac's murder were also to appear. At some point, a 4th teenager, aged 15, would also go on to be charged with murder, but at this current time, I can't find any reports with any dates on it. And regarding that further court date on the 3rd of August 2010, there's also no further reports on that. On the 17th of August 2010, one of the 4, that being a 16-year-old, was to appear at the Old Bailey via video link from a Young Offenders Institute, and he appeared before Judge David Paget QC and confirmed his name and that he understood the proceedings during a short hearing. Here, Judge Paget had set a trial for January 10th, 2011, and the trial was expected to last up to 4 weeks. The teenager was then remanded into custody. Then, on October 1st, 2010, 2 teenagers, both aged 16, had made an appearance at the Old Bailey. They stood in the dock of the court and pleaded not guilty to both counts, that being the murder of Zac and the GBH of the 14-year-old pupil. With the original trial due to take place in January of 2011, Judge Timothy Pontius then agreed to move it to March the 7th, 2011 because of delays in preparing the case, and it was now due to last up to 5 weeks, rather than the initial 4. And after this hearing, the 2 teenagers were then remanded into custody. Then on the 23rd of December 2010, the other 16-year-old boy would appear at the Old Bailey, where he had pleaded not guilty to the charges brought against him, that being the murder of Zac and the GBH of the 14-year-old pupil. After this court date, he was to stand on trial on the 7th of March with the other 2 boys. I can't find no reports for the 15-year-old boy's plea hearing, but at some point after the 23rd of December 2010, the 15-year-old boy would also plead not guilty to the charges brought against him, and he would also stand on trial. So to round up, 4 teenage boys, 3 16-year-olds and a 15-year-old were to stand on trial on March the 7th, 2011 for the murder of Zac Olumegbon and the grievous bodily harm of the 14-year-old pupil who was with Zac. So, with the trial being postponed until the 9th of March 2011, it was heard, and as we previously spoken about, that Zac was chased and stabbed to death outside of his school by members of a rival gang. It was told to the court that he arrived at the gates for morning lessons when the youths had jumped out of the car brandishing knives. The prosecution would go on to say that Zac was hounded down before being knifed in the heart, neck and buttock and left dying when school staff had found him in the back garden of 20 Gypsy Road Gardens. Prosecutor Ed Brown QC said the reality of the events that were to lead to Zac's death is that it had its origins in the dreadful but certain fact of rivalry between young gangs in South London. Needless posturing that an occasion leads to violence and on occasion serious violence and death. The fate that Zac suffered that day was a tragic and terrible waste of a young life. The prosecution went on to say that Zac was either a member or an associate of the TN1 or Trust No One gang from the Tulse Hill area, and it was claimed that Zac was attacked by members of the local gas gang, short for Guns and Shanks, because in 2010 he was present when a member of TN1 stabbed a member of the gas gang, and that his murder was the revenge attack for that stabbing. Mr. Brown QC would go on to say that on the morning of Friday the 2nd of July 2010, Zac had made his way to the Park campus school. He went on to say within moments he found himself being hunted down and killed. He was separated, alone, chased, caught and stabbed to death. He had been stabbed 4 times. He had only just arrived at school. He was killed a matter of meters from it. He was just 15 at the time. Eyewitnesses described seeing 5 youths pull up in a green car just as the school was opening at around 8:45 AM. The prosecution then went on to say they had travelled as a team to that location to find Zac, adding 4 of the 5 chased Zac down the street, more than one with a knife. The youth behind the wheel of the car drove it along with them as the 4 ran after their prey, the car ready to pick them up and quickly escape once their purpose had been achieved. Given the weapons and the determination with which his attackers were acting, once caught there was likely to be only one outcome, that he would have received serious and obviously life-threatening injuries. As we previously spoken about, and it would now be told to the court, that one of the group, age 15, had also stabbed a second boy outside the school before Zac was killed. Mr. Brown said another young boy was also stabbed with a knife immediately outside the school. He was lucky. However, all the signs are that there was one prime target, and it was Zac. The jury had also heard that one of the assistant head teachers at Park Campus School were aware of the friction between Zac's gang and the gas gang. The prosecution would go on to say the teacher had discussed gang membership with Zac. The prosecution say it was a gang and teen related killing. And on this day, it was also heard that a 5th teenager was to stand trial at a later date. At a later court date, the prosecution had opened up the day with showing the court the chase that was captured on CCTV. Again, they would go on to explain the events leading up to and during the attack. Elaborating on the stabbing of the 14-year-old pupil, known to the court as Witness B, Mr. Brown would go on to say whether or not he had thought that B was Zac and therefore their target, the occupants of the car had plainly seen Zac outside the school. Zac, by now alone, ran from his attackers into Gypsy Road Gardens crying for help, quoting, "Somebody help," and "Oh sh." Zac was being pursued by 4 black youths running after him. The car that brought them to the scene was also following, ready of course to pick the team up once the stabbing had been carried out. The first behind Zac was holding a large knife, as were the others. It is likely the knife was the knife that was later found by people quite away from the scene. The youth just behind Zac was wearing a white bandana, and the second and the third had their faces covered with black hoods. And it was heard that the 4th youth who had stabbed Witness B dropped a knife sheath on the pavement during the chase. At a further court date, it was heard that Zac had told a teacher that he was in beef with a local gang and spoke about his troubles a month before his death after becoming involved in a fight outside the front gates of the school. It was said he had to be restrained by teacher Renford Carr during the incident at Park Campus School. Mr. Carr said his terminology was that he was in beef with the gas gang. They are in an argument, they've got issues. As we previously spoken about, one of the policies at the school was that phones would be confiscated off students in the morning. Mr. Carr, giving evidence, had told how Zac had refused to hand over his mobile phone when he arrived at Park Campus at around 8:30 AM. He said that Zac asked to see a senior teacher and was waiting in reception when a car drove past the school. Zac was then heard telling a friend, that's them, before going out the door. Mr. Carr would go on to say that he saw another boy, witness B, being attacked by one youth at the front gates. It was then told that he chased after the youth after grabbing a crutch from a girl at the school. He went on to say, I continued running up the road, and by the time I got closer, I had a group of boys coming towards my direction, cutting across my path towards a car. There was 4 of them, the boy I saw was one of them. He told how he stood in front of the car as the youths got into the passenger and back seats. He went on to say, I had a young girl's crutch in my hand. My intention was to try and hit the windscreen. He went on to say, the car had charged at me. By then, a colleague had pulled me out of the way of the car. I remember shouting for somebody to get the registration number. He then followed a colleague down a path between 2 blocks of flats. It was then he realised what had happened to Zac, and he went over to where Zac's body was. Then, on the 23rd of March 2011, after 2 weeks of evidence being given, Judge Giles Forrester ordered that the trial be halted for legal reasons, and the 4 teenagers accused of stabbing Zac were to stand a retrial, with the retrial date set for September the 12th, 2011. So, the retrial would start on this date, and at this hearing, they would once go over again what we've already spoke about regarding the whole case with Zac. For the majority of the retrial, there was no report, as evidence was already given in prior reports. But on the 14th of October 2011, the court would hear that a 5th 17-year-old boy was a passenger in the stolen Nissan car, which was used to carry the attackers to and from the murder scene. Given evidence on that day, he said he claimed that the group were in fact a part of gas gang and were touring schools in South London to meet girls, but said he couldn't remember which schools they had planned to visit. Edward Brown QC said that the defendant was instead part of a team who planned the attack outside Park Campus School. The defendant said after the group returned to the car after the attack, another defendant said to him, I think I've stabbed someone. But in response, Mr. Brown had said, the cruising for girls had gone badly wrong. Surely there would have been a surprise, questions, things like that. With the defendant saying, there might have been talk between the driver of the car and the front passenger, but not with me. I took what he said as a joke. He's not that type of person. Jurors were then shown video footage from YouTube which featured members of the gas gang rapping about hiding knives in their trainers.
Play your position, because I came from nothing but boredom. I hit shanks in the back of my Jordan.
Mr. Brown accused the defendant of lying to avoid responsibility for Zac's murder, when he claimed another defendant had taken Zac's phone in his original statement to police, and it later emerged that he himself had took the mobile phone. Mr. Brown said that there was 52 seconds between you running up Gypsy Hill Road and you being in the car leaving. What were you doing for all that time? With him replying, for all that time, that is not a lot of time, sir. I picked up Zac's telephone and ran to the car. Mr. Brown went on to say, you were down that passageway after Zac, weren't you? With him replying, it's not true. The defendant added that he was shocked to be told about a text message which read, R.I.P. Zac, saying, I did not witness anyone getting stabbed. Talking of the events leading up to the attack, the court was also told that on this day, the 5 defendants had met at a house in Stockwell the night before the incident on July 2nd, 2010, and they had stayed there until early the next day when they travelled south towards Park Campus School in the stolen car. So on the 7th of November 2011, the trial had come to an end and the jury would retire to consider their verdict. And a week later, on the 14th of November 2011, the jury would find Kyle Kinghorn, aka Clicks, Hilda DeMoris, aka Mad H, Ricardo Giddings, aka Maggie, and Jamal Moore, aka J-Kid, guilty of Zac's murder, and Shaquille Horton was found guilty of manslaughter. And at this time, there's no report of the GBH charge, so unfortunately, I can't give you that verdict. The group was then to be sentenced on the 21st of December 2011. Then on that day, the group was sentenced to a total of 76 years in prison. Giddings, the knife man who had struck the fatal blow was jailed for a minimum term of 18 years. Kinghorn and DeMorris were each jailed for a minimum of 16 years, and Moore was given at least 14 years, with Horton sentenced to 12 years. Jailing the gang, Judge Giles Forrester QC said the attacks were vicious, shocking, and sickening acts of violence outside a school in West Norwood at a time when pupils and staff were gathering at the start of the school day. Zac was age 15. He was chased along the street as he fled for his life. He was trapped in a nearby back garden and stabbed to death, which was a terrifying and terrible way for him to die, said the judge. And that is the Zac Olumegbon case, and I just want to take this time out to say rest in peace to Zac and my condolences with his family. Now, what's interesting about Zac's case is that Sneakbo, at the time being a gas gang rapper, in fact found out after Zac's death that he was actually Zac's cousin. Now, it has been rumoured that Zac's death played a key part into the Brixton versus Brixton Hill beef, or as you guys will know it, the 6-7 versus 150 beef and their affiliated gangs. But again, it's been widely debated whether it was this key event or whether this had just played a part in a long-running feud between the areas. And that, guys, is Cases Season 1, the UK Rap Files. Cases Season 2 will be out soon, and I'll let you guys know in a community tab post. Now, Season 2, we're going to be looking at UK cases that are not necessarily rap related. Now, this is anything from mass shootings to serial killers to some movie and TV inspired murders. I think you're going to be in for a little bit of a shock when we go through Cases Season 2. But if you do like cases, give the video a thumbs up. Let me know what you guys think of this in the comment section below. And guys, if you want the latest drill, street and music news out of the UK, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. It's been your boy Huncho, and I'm out.